Coming up, we learn about the impact of tribal colleges and universities. A First Nations Forge Fellow looks to the past for inspiration, and coal is not king anymore. I am Aaliyah Chavez. Join us for those interviews, plus headlines from the ICT Newscast.
The Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Arizona State University is a proud supporter of Indian Country Today. Students at Cronkite News and Gaylord College at the University of Oklahoma cover Indigenous communities together. This important work is distributed by more than 100 news organizations. This collaboration provides a much-needed boost to coverage of Native American communities nationwide. Learn more at cronkitenews.azpbs.org.
This is the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez.
Go'atsi Hopa. Thank you for joining us. People in the United States are able to order another round of free rapid COVID-19 tests. The White House announced that tests are now eligible to be reordered using its website covid.gov/tests. Each household can place an order for free, and each order comes with 8 rapid tests. To order online, you can visit the website covid.gov/tests. To order by phone, you can call 1-800-232-0233. The number again is 1-800-232-0233. In Canada, plans are moving ahead to build a new residence for Inuit in Ottawa who are staying longer for medical appointments. The city's planning committee approved Larga Baffin's application, but some remain opposed to the project.
Larga Baffin wants to build a 350-bed facility in South Ottawa. The proposal calls for amending existing zoning rules to add 2 additional levels to the building. But a number of residents have voiced concerns about potential traffic impacts, changes to the look of the neighborhood, and other social concerns. Local councillor Diane Dean said these concerns are valid at last week's planning committee meeting.
While the merit of this facility is acknowledged, it is not related to the land use planning, zoning, and potential site plan issues that we have focused on. Whether it be an application for Larga Baffin or a high-rise development in Kitchissippi Ward, it's critical that we allow residents to voice their legitimate planning concerns and not pass judgment or assume they have ulterior motives.
Councillor Scott Moffat sits on the planning committee, and he says resident concerns are largely based on unsubstantiated fears of what the facility is for and who will be using it, rather than legitimate facts.
It's the use, it's the perception of what the use is. There's this belief that if you bring a certain population to your community, that it's going to change your community, that there's going to be higher crime rates, that there's going to be these things. And these are, just as someone who represents people, it's offensive to hear these things, that they think that just because this one use is going to be in your community, that you're going to have all these negative impacts.
Moffat says it tends to be only certain types of development proposals that face this type of resident pushback, such as applications for group homes or women's shelters.
And I think it's the fear of the unknown. It's a stigma that's attached to certain type of facility, a certain segment of the population. It's wildly unfair. It usually comes from a point of privilege. It usually comes from a point of entitlement, and they are scared of things that they don't know, and they oppose it on that belief. And instead of reaching out and understanding what it is, they just get more embedded into their fear of that, and they don't want that in their community.
Deans had put forward a motion to defer consideration of Larga Baffin's application until further study on potential impacts could be done, but it was defeated. And the planning committee voted unanimously to move the application forward. It will now go to City Council for a vote on July 6th. Fraser Needham, AP10 National News, Ottawa.
Well, July 12th marks a solemn anniversary for the loved ones and fans of world-renowned hoop dancer Nakota Lawrence. Today marks the 2-year anniversary of his death after a climbing accident at the age 30. Lawrence was a 9-time championship winner and was even a Cirque du Soleil performer. The hoop dance took him all over the world. One of his infamous moves was to create a sphere with several hoops, throw it in the air, and then create wings. Indigenous Australian advocates are fighting to save ancient rock art. The 40,000-year-old sacred rock art in Western Australia is being affected by pollution, and there are also plans for a major gas project. Raylene Cooper and Josie Alec are two Indigenous women ringing the alarm. They're worried the 2020 destruction of Aboriginal rock shelters in 2020 could happen in slow motion at the site. Cooper says the decay is already visible in the Marunja rock art, which is sacred and contains traditional Indigenous stories. In an effort to gain global support, the pair will address the United Nations about their concerns. Last month, the Australian Conservation Fund launched a legal challenge against the Scarborough gas project. And those are the headlines for the ICT Newscast. Coming up, what is the legacy of the tribal college movement, and how does coal mining figure into clean energy? But first, meet a Forge Fellow who connects the past and present. Stay with us. Tribal colleges and universities are valuable institutions to Indigenous students. There are 32 TCUs around the country, and the first one started in 1968 as the Navajo Community College. Holly Mackey joins us today to talk about the legacy of learning on tribal lands. She's the executive director for the White House Initiative on Advancing Educational Equity, Excellence, and Economic Opportunity for Native Americans and Strengthening Tribal Colleges and Universities. Welcome, Holly.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So at a high level, tell us what your office does.
So, as executive director for the White House Initiative, I really think about all of the policy and practices associated with K-12 education and tribal colleges and universities and the pathways throughout. So we have a model for preschool through lifelong learning. We want to make sure that at any stage in a community member's life, we're supporting their goals and supporting the community's goals for advancing economic opportunities within their community. And really, having come from Northern Cheyenne, from a very small rural community in southeastern Montana, right, I've been thrilled to have the opportunity to have a platform to communicate to other people what our communities need. We happen to be working within an administration that is very supportive of advancing tribal sovereignty and self-determination. So a few of the things that we're doing through the initiative in order to advance those things are we are working on a Native Languages MOA and thinking through how to more intentionally incorporate Native languages into the everyday lived experiences of community members. We're also thinking about how to provide additional resources or think about the barriers that tribal colleges have, how students are unable sometimes to access those resources. So working very closely with AHEC and the different organizations to support that, to get an understanding of what people want there. And then going on site visits. One of the things we know is if you don't get out into the communities, you can't possibly understand them. And so in my short time, I have been in 7 states and I've visited 3 tribal colleges, and I've had the opportunity to really hear firsthand from folks across multiple contexts what it is they need from the administration. And I have the platform really to advance that up, and then I can share the ideas with the secretary, with the White House, and then think about how to get the resources and support back into the communities.
And when you're having those firsthand conversations with students, what exactly are they telling you that they need help with?
Well, the primary thing that we see is always related to funding. Oftentimes, tribal colleges are not funded or structured in the same way as the traditional college might be, or even HBCUs. Many of them do not accept federal financial aid, and students are heavily reliant on Pell Grants to attend schools. And then we have to think about facilities. So one of the things that has come up multiple times is even within some of the tribes that are considered to be wealthier tribes or to have really well-established colleges, we still see that structures are a problem. So you'll have this amazing opportunity to learn within your own community and stay connected to family. And yet a lot of our colleges are still operating out of modular trailers or in facilities that need significant upgrades. So we're hearing on both ends, right? We need additional funding, we need help there, we need the structures. But then also we're hearing a different story. I had the opportunity to travel to Salish Kootenai with the secretary for their graduation. And despite the obstacles, because in Indian country, of course, we're very resilient, what we're hearing most from students is that they appreciate the opportunity to stay connected to stay with their families, to stay with their loved ones, to stay connected to ceremony. And as a former instructor at a tribal college in my home community, I saw firsthand how important this was for students. Where I taught technical writing. No one wants to take technical writing. And yet, you can structure your class in a way that supports students and meets them where they're at. We can't correct what's happening in K-12 education. We can only create a better pathway moving forward. And so for me, this has been a tremendous opportunity to really share and uplift these voices and think about what it is that matters most. And while we know there is high need, what matters most is our own communities to our own people. And that's the message that comes through over and over and over again.
When you're talking to your non-native colleagues about the importance of TCUs, what exactly do you say to them? I mean, we know TCUs to be a cornerstone in so many Indigenous communities, but how do you even get that across to someone who might not know about it?
I think that having non-native people often have familiarity perhaps with HBCUs, right, or Hispanic serving institutions. And so I really build off of what someone's prior knowledge might be. So helping them understand that also within our communities, we have these tribal colleges that operate similarly. However, the differences are vast, right? For example, my colleagues are often unaware of the fact that most of our tribal colleges are only 2-year colleges, right? Most of them do not have graduate programs. So there's some differences there. But the best way to communicate it across is to show pictures, to show stories. I invite my non-native colleagues to all of our listening sessions, right? At any opportunity, I invite them to learn about the culture. And within the administration, that's something that's been remarkable for me to see, is the degree to which my non-native colleagues are interested and they ask smart questions. And then they do a lot of learning on their own. But I think that there's an intangible that you really have to go out and see, to feel, to experience. And so many of my non-native colleagues have been on these visits out to tribal communities and have gotten to experience firsthand like the warmth and the love and the feel of a tribal college. And so to that, you have to then translate that it's not just about school. Right. Many people, you go to college, it's about school, and helping them understand that it's not just about school. It's most definitely about community and culture and support and knowing that you have that home within a home.
Holly, you started this interview with saying that you're from Northern Cheyenne and you know these communities really well. What inspires you to do this work?
I think our people inspire me more than anything. When we see all of the graphic tees and all the amazing artists doing work out there, I'm always struck by like our ancestors' wildest dreams. And I can't imagine for a moment that my ancestors ever imagined that I would have the opportunity to work at the White House to help uplift their voices and to really think about all of the ways that we can move forward and honor their legacies, honor their sacrifices, and doing it through education, doing it in a way that allows us to operationalize Native nation building, to support our communities, as opposed to continuing the same process of overlooking the community voice.
Well, Holly, thank you so much.
Thank you.
The Forge Project is a Native-led art, culture, and decolonial education initiative in upstate New York. 6 Indigenous thought leaders have been awarded fellowships, including Tanya Willard. Her multimedia work melds the contemporary and traditional and its intersections between cultures. She's been an artist in residence with the Gallery Gachet in Vancouver's downtown East Side and at the Banff Center. She's also a well-known international curator and assistant professor in creative studies at the University of British Columbia. Welcome, Tanya, and congratulations.
Why? Thank you. It's so lovely to be here.
So tell us about your project.
Yeah, so my work really looks at ideas of Western European art and tries to find ways to fit Indigenous knowledges and Indigenous ideas into or really to break that container and say, what do our galleries look like, informed by our different distinct Indigenous societies, cultures, governance, and laws? So I work really collaboratively with other artists and also with non-human collaborators. I think of my land, Secwepemc as a collaborator, and really think about Indigenous resurgence through artistic expression on the land as a continuum of our ancestral struggles for land and against settler colonialism.
Tell us about your recent work.
Yeah, so my recent work does just that. I often will invite people to my home territories. Bush Gallery is a way that I describe what I'm doing, as well as ideas of citation. So we think of citation as maybe citing a paper in an academic context, but I also think about site, S-I-T-E, site specificity, and think about citation as ways in which, as Indigenous peoples, we have learned to encode knowledge in the land. Through our stories, through our cultures, through our songs and dances, we read the land and we encode and share knowledges from the land. So really my project is often engaged with things out on the land. I also show in galleries and do artistic work through residencies and different projects, but close to my heart is the work I do here in my homelands in Secwepemc. I often think about involving my family and just different ways that we live and exist as Indigenous peoples, and how do we grow that and show the rest of the art world, often informed by Western European art, how beautiful our ways and how much we could add to that idea of art.
There aren't too many others who are doing work like this. In a larger sense, why is it important to do this kind of work?
Yeah, well, I think one, people are doing this work in different ways. It's just that we don't see them as much in the art world, being that it is this kind of informed by so much different aesthetics and traditions and histories. And so really it's about recognizing the work that our aunties do, the work that our grandmas do, the work, the beautiful aesthetic practices that we engage in when we're picking berries on the land, and really just translating that. I think of it often as a kind of translating that and recognizing the beauty within that, and then bringing that to also, in addition to the land, also into a gallery context. And so, I think that people are doing it, but in a different kind of way, maybe. I always place my work within a continuum of the ancestral and the future. So I engaged in this work with my sons and with different visitors to our land and with people here, as well as promoting and working with revitalizing our Secwepemc language, which is really connected to the land.
I love that you mentioned all of the relatives that make up our communities. I'm wondering where you get your inspiration from, and if you're ever hitting a creative block, how do you work through that?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, all the time. I struggle as a person who creates. There's times when it's difficult to get ideas or to feel the motivation. For me, what has really brought me joy and inspiration has been my land. I built a home. I relocated from the city. I built a home on my reserve, and that's not perfect. Our reserves are still struggling with many different issues caused by colonization, but it still brings me joy and inspiration. So I sometimes just go out and take a walk and see what I see on the land, and that can bring me inspiration and continue kind of the ideas flowing and getting some work done.
You mentioned earlier that collaboration is something that you love to do. In this Forge project specifically, will you be collaborating with any others?
Well, I hope to engage with the Forge staff, and as well as the gardening project out there, and with as much as the architecture is really beautiful there, also with the land. There's really interesting parallels with some species of plants that occur here, as well as in upstate New York. And so I'm really looking forward to exploring that. I'll often draw from what similarities or crossovers we might have between different territories stemming from my own, and then recognizing others when I travel, because often it's different with Forge, actually. They've been so instrumental in working with local Indigenous peoples, but often other galleries, aren't in touch with Indigenous organizations or peoples. And so it's really about also trying to reach out and build those relationships and look at features that we might share and have shared experiences of and knowledge from in our lands.
Well, Tanya Willard, congratulations again, and thanks for being here.
Thank you. It's such an honor. And thank you for having me today, Cookstown.
The problem for some 25 tribal nations is how to unwind coal dollars and the jobs that it provides. Just as important is the question, are there resources available to make that transition work? ICT's Mark Trahant has this report. It's part of the Indigenous Economics Project with funding from the Bay and Paul Foundations.
A century ago, Scientific American said this about coal: we cannot get along without coal. Even in this enlightened age of hydroelectric developments, gasoline engines, alcohol-burning devices, and so on, coal remains the prime fuel. So much so that the magazine concluded a coal famine would affect our entire national life. Now, it's the other way around. Coal affects our entire national life. Once it was the largest source of electricity, today it's a little more than 1/3. Across the planet, utility companies are ending their purchases of coal. Just last week, Idaho Power said its transition away from coal is 6 years ahead of schedule. Why now? Coal is 2.5 times dirtier than other fossil fuels, creating even more greenhouse gas emissions. If we can't transition away from coal, there's little chance we will be successful with other fossil fuels. The Navajo Nation has been wrestling with this issue for more than a decade. The Navajo Generating Station, a coal-fired plant near Page, Arizona, closed in 2019. Another plant near Farmington, New Mexico, is set to end production at the end of this month. And a third plant, Four Corners Power, is exploring options to keep going. Jonathan Nez is president of the Navajo Nation. Last week, he asked the Arizona Corporation Commission to approve a $100 million fund for transition costs.
Navajo people lost their jobs because of these closures. But what we're trying to do is develop a transition, and right, to let others know that you can't just close a power plant just like that, and that's what happened with Navajo. And a lot of lessons learned, and what we're telling others with coal-fired power plants is those owners should let the community know ahead of time, maybe even 5 years ahead of time, that it's going to close, so that it doesn't have a big impact like it did with the Navajo Generating Station, the Peabody coal mine, and the revenues that were utilized to provide direct services to our Navajo people. And that's where the Just Transition movement really ties in. We are pressing on the state of Arizona to put some money aside to do that. New Mexico has done that, as you know. Mm-hmm. The Energy Transition Act actually put some dollars aside to help with the transition from closing a power plant to something more greener.
This is a challenge for coal producers across the country, including the 25 tribal nations that own coal resources. How should tribes accomplish a just transition, moving to a cleaner energy source while at the same time preserving jobs? Janine Yazzie is the Southwest Regional Director for the Indian Collective. She has been working on these issues for more than a decade.
I hate when I hear people say how they were surprised and shocked about how fast this transition has come, because people have been telling them for quite some time that this was coming. And I hope this is a lesson that can be learned, because there are other things and other challenges and other threats that we're facing where we can see the same pattern play out, or we can learn from this. We can call our losses that were unnecessary in the first place because everyone was advising against it, except for, the businessmen who saw money to be made somehow when everyone else was transitioning away from coal.
The shift away from coal is a big story. Globally, the United Nations has been clear about the need to dismantle coal infrastructure and phase out that fossil fuel over the next 8 years. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres warned Tuesday of a dangerous disconnect between what scientists and citizens are demanding to curb climate change and what governments are actually doing about it.
We are witnessing a historic and dangerous disconnect. Science and citizens are demanding ambitious and transformative climate action. Meanwhile, many governments are dragging their feet. This inaction has grave consequences.
When the pandemic took hold, the federal government invested more than $31 billion into tribal communities to help people navigate that plague. Yet, climate change represents a larger crisis, and the investment has not kept up. It's particularly challenging for the communities that have relied on jobs from coal.
When we saw the turnaround and the huge influx of investment into Indian country as a result of the pandemic, we were seeing in real time something happen that we were told was never a possibility. And so I think that we should take that example of how quickly they responded and how much was possible and made available to invest in Indian country. And a lot of that money is for infrastructure as well. To take some of what we have available now and to request for similar investments, not just for Indian country, but for all of the communities that are suffering with these stranded assets and the infrastructure that is there that have been, reliant upon a coal economy for better or for worse.
In Phoenix, Arizona, Mark Trahant, ICT News.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For more news, visit ictnews.org. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives. I am Aaliyah Chavez.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.